Jasmine froze. Her heart pounded so violently it felt like it might burst from her chest. Just a few feet away stood a massive silverback gorilla, its dark, unblinking eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. The jungle air was heavy, almost suffocating, wrapping around her like a humid shroud. Every sound seemed amplified: the distant rustle of leaves, the faint chirping of birds, and the deep, rhythmic breathing of the creature towering before her. Her pulse roared in her ears, drowning out rational thought. She could feel the damp earth beneath her boots, slick and unsteady, threatening to give way. The gorilla's sheer size was overwhelming. Muscles rippled beneath its thick, dark fur, and its chest rose and fell with deliberate power. This wasn't a creature she had seen on a screen, safely behind glass, or in a book. This was raw, untamed nature staring her down. She thought this was her end. How did it come to this? Jasmine's mind raced, desperate to understand how she had gone from an eager adventurer to prey standing frozen in the heart of the jungle. The journey had started so differently. Jasmine Collins had always been captivated by the wild. Growing up in a quiet town, she had spent her days watching wildlife documentaries, her imagination filled with the untamed beauty of jungles and the creatures within them. The dense forests of Africa had been her ultimate dream, a place she believed would bring her closer to the natural world and far from the noise of city life. At 27, she finally had her chance. A plane ticket, a guided tour, and an insatiable curiosity were all she needed. But as she stepped off the plane and into the vibrant wilderness, she had no idea how unprepared she truly was. The jungle was alive, magnificent yet unforgiving, far more powerful than the dream she had cherished for years. The jeep came to a slow, grinding halt as the group reached the edge of the jungle. Jasmine stepped out, her boots sinking slightly into the damp, earthy ground. The air was thick with humidity, carrying the rich, heady scent of soil and vegetation. Above her, a canopy of green stretched endlessly, the sunlight filtering through in dappled patterns, creating a surreal, almost dreamlike glow. The jungle wasn't just alive, it was pulsating, buzzing with life in every corner. Birds called out from unseen perches, their sharp cries blending with the rustle of leaves stirred by the occasional breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a monkey chattered, its sound breaking through the otherwise harmonious symphony of nature. The ground beneath her was littered with fallen leaves and tangled roots, the remains of a world constantly renewing itself. This, Jasmine thought, is what I've been dreaming of my entire life. Her awe was interrupted by the voice of her guide, Kofi, a tall, weathered man who carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged to this untamed world. His eyes scanned the group, landing on each person as if to assess their readiness. This jungle, he began, his voice steady and firm, is alive. It breathes, it listens, and it remembers. But it doesn't forgive carelessness. He paused, his gaze sharp. Stay close to the group at all times. Straying too far is dangerous. The wildlife here is magnificent, but it is also unpredictable, especially the gorillas. Jasmine listened, nodding with the others, but a small part of her couldn't help but think the warning was overly cautious. She had spent years studying documentaries and reading about these jungles. She knew the risks, didn't she? As the group began their trek into the forest, Jasmine's curiosity surged. The jungle was everything she had imagined and more. Each step took her deeper into a world that felt untouched by time. Massive trees stretched skyward, their ancient trunks wrapped in moss and vines. Exotic flowers in vibrant reds, yellows, and purples peeked out from the underbrush, their petals glistening with morning dew. But there was something else, something beneath the beauty, a sense of quiet danger. It wasn't just Kofi's warnings, it was the way the jungle seemed to watch them, every sound echoing as if to remind them they were strangers here. Kofi led the group with practiced ease, his machete slicing through the occasional dense vine. He pointed out various plants and animals, explaining their significance with a mix of reverence and practicality. Yet, every so often he would stop, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the surroundings. The gorillas in this area are territorial, he explained during one of these pauses. If we're lucky, we might see them. But we must respect their space. Stay calm, keep your distance, and never challenge their authority. Jasmine nodded, but she couldn't help feeling a twinge of excitement. She had always wanted to see a gorilla up close, to witness its raw power and presence. Kofi's warnings, though serious, felt distant like the disclaimers at the start of an adventure film. As they moved deeper into the jungle, Jasmine felt her resolve wavering. Her practical side reminded her to stick with the group, to heed Kofi's experience. But her adventurous spirit whispered otherwise. This was her chance to truly connect with the wild, to step beyond the boundaries and experience it for herself. The internal conflict gnawed at her. She respected Kofi's authority, but she couldn't ignore the pull of the jungle, the way it seemed to call her, inviting her to explore its secrets. Her heart raced not with fear, but with the thrill of possibility. For now she stayed close, her camera at the ready, snapping photos of the scenery. But the jungle had a way of luring you in, and Jasmine knew it wouldn't be long before her curiosity overpowered her caution. The group stopped briefly to rest, and Jasmine took the opportunity to glance around. Her eyes caught sight of a narrow opening in the trees, just off the main path. Beyond it lay a secluded spot, dappled with sunlight streaming through the canopy. The vibrant green of the jungle floor seemed to glow, untouched and inviting. Her fingers tightened around her camera as the temptation tugged at her. It was perfect for the kind of shots she had dreamed of capturing. The kind that would make her feel like a true explorer, immersed in the wild. Jasmine hesitated. Kofi's warning echoed in her mind, this jungle doesn't forgive carelessness. She glanced back at the group, busy chatting and sipping water. It would only take a few minutes. She would stay close enough to hear them and be back before anyone noticed. Her heart raced, torn between caution and curiosity. But the allure of the jungle, the promise of discovery, was too strong to resist. With a deep breath, she stepped off the path, careful not to disturb the foliage too much. The moment her boots touched the untouched ground, Jasmine felt a rush of exhilaration. She was no longer a tourist in a guided group, she was an adventurer, charting her own course. The sunlight filtered through the dense canopy above, painting the ground in shifting shades of emerald and gold. Jasmine moved carefully, her senses heightened. The jungle seemed even more alive here, away from the others. The rustling of leaves, the occasional call of a bird, the faint hum of insects, it was a symphony that seemed composed just for her. She paused to snap a photo of a brilliantly colored flower, its petals glistening with moisture. Further ahead, she spotted a cluster of vines hanging from an ancient tree, their shadows weaving intricate patterns on the jungle floor. The air was thick, almost tangible, carrying the scent of damp earth and blooming flora. Jasmine couldn't help but smile. This was everything she had imagined and more. But as she ventured deeper, the atmosphere began to shift. The sounds of the jungle grew quieter, the vibrant symphony fading into a muted hum. The sunlight filtering through the trees seemed dimmer, casting longer shadows that danced ominously. Jasmine's steps slowed. She noticed how the underbrush had grown denser, the vines thicker, as if the jungle were trying to close in around her. A sudden chill prickled her skin despite the humid air. Then she heard a rustling sound, faint but distinct. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. It could be the wind or a small animal moving through the brush. But it wasn't. Another sound followed, a low, deep snap, like a heavy branch breaking underfoot. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She turned slowly, scanning the trees around her. The dense foliage obscured her view, but she could feel that something was there. Her grip on her camera tightened as she strained to listen. The rustling grew louder, closer, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of heavy breathing, deep, rhythmic, and deliberate. Her instincts screamed to run, but her feet stayed rooted to the ground. Fear coiled tightly in her chest, making it hard to breathe. She didn't dare move, afraid that even the smallest sound would draw whatever was out there straight to her. "Stay calm," she whispered to herself, though her voice trembled. "It's probably nothing." But the jungle felt different now, ominous and watchful. The once inviting greenery seemed to loom over her, shadows lengthening as if to engulf her. The breathing grew louder. Jasmine's pulse quickened as she realized it was no small animal. Whatever it was massive. She tried to rationalize the situation. Maybe it was just another part of the jungle's charm, another wild creature going about its day. But the weight of the moment told her otherwise. This wasn't a casual encounter. Her heart raced as the realization hit her she wasn't alone, and whatever was out there wasn't just passing by. She had ventured into a world where she didn't belong, where the rules of survival were primal and unforgiving. The sound stopped suddenly, plunging the jungle into an eerie silence. Jasmine's breath was shallow, her ears straining to catch any sign of movement. The quiet was worse than the noise. It was as if the jungle itself was holding its breath. A chill ran down her spine as she felt it. A presence she couldn't see but knew was there. Her body remained frozen, every muscle locked in place. She had wanted an adventure, a connection with the wild. Now, standing in the heart of the jungle, she realized she had found it, but at a cost she wasn't prepared to pay. Jasmine stood motionless, every muscle in her body paralyzed with fear. Emerging from the dense underbrush, a massive silverback gorilla stepped into view. The sight of it was both breathtaking and terrifying. Its sheer size defied belief, broad shoulders rippled with muscle, arms that seemed to carry the strength of the jungle itself, and a chest so powerful it seemed capable of knocking down a tree with ease. Its dark fur gleamed under the filtered sunlight, thick and untamed, moving slightly with each deliberate breath. But it was the gorilla's eyes that held Jasmine captive. Deep, intelligent, and unflinching, they locked onto hers with an intensity that made her feel as if it could see straight into her soul. Those eyes weren't just observing, they were analyzing, deciding. Her mind screamed at her to run, to escape, but her body refused to comply. Her legs felt like stone, her breath caught in her throat. She had dreamed of seeing a gorilla up close, but nothing had prepared her for the raw, commanding presence of this creature. The silverback let out a low, rumbling grunt that vibrated through the ground and up into her chest. Jasmine's pulse quickened, her hands trembling as she tried to remember Kofi's warnings: stay calm. Don't make sudden movements. Avoid direct eye contact. The gorilla tilted its head slightly, its massive body still except for the slow rise and fall of its chest. Jasmine couldn't help but notice the sheer power in its every motion, the way its muscles shifted even with the smallest turn of its head. Another grunt escaped its throat, deeper this time, and it took a single, deliberate step forward. The ground seemed to quake beneath its weight. Jasmine's breathing became shallow as her mind raced. Was it preparing to charge? Was she too close to its territory? Her gaze darted to the camera still hanging from her neck. What if it thought she was a threat? Her instincts battled within her. Running was the most natural response, but she knew it was the worst thing she could do. Gorillas were faster than humans and far more powerful. Turning her back would only provoke it. But staying still felt impossible as her body screamed for her to escape. The gorilla's gaze didn't waver. It stared at her, its eyes narrowing slightly as if testing her resolve. Jasmine's knees trembled, threatening to buckle beneath her, but she forced herself to stay upright. She remembered Kofi's voice. Gorillas don't tolerate challenges, show no fear, and they might leave you alone. She wanted to believe that. But the reality of standing before this creature felt like balancing on the edge of a knife. The gorilla shifted its weight, its massive frame moving with a strange grace that belied its size. Jasmine could hear every sound it made: the crunch of leaves underfoot, the faint rustle of its fur as it moved, and the low rumble of its breathing. Then, it did something she didn't expect. The silverback extended one of its enormous hands, its fingers spreading wide, almost as if reaching out to her. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding so loudly she thought it might burst. The hand was massive, each finger thick and strong, the dark skin lined with calluses from a life in the wild. It hovered just a few feet from her, its movement slow and deliberate. Jasmine's mind reeled. Was it testing her? Showing curiosity? Or was this some kind of warning? She couldn't tell. Her grip on her camera tightened, the strap digging into her palm as if it could somehow ground her in this surreal moment. The gorilla's eyes flickered briefly to the object around her neck, then back to her face. It didn't growl or lunge, just watched her with that same unrelenting intensity. Her thoughts raced. Should she move? Was this an invitation to interact? Or was it waiting for her to make the wrong move? She swallowed hard, her mouth dry, and decided to stay as still as possible. The gorilla's hand lingered in the air for a moment longer before it slowly withdrew. Jasmine's chest rose and fell rapidly as she tried to steady her breathing. The creature's movements were so deliberate, so calculated, that it was impossible to guess its intentions. Jasmine's thoughts began to settle, though the tension in the air remained suffocating. She realized she wasn't just afraid, she was awestruck. There was something profoundly humbling about being in the presence of such a powerful creature, something that words couldn't capture. The silverback grunted again, softer this time, and took a small step back. Jasmine exhaled shakily, relief mixing with disbelief. It wasn't attacking. It wasn't charging. Instead, it seemed to be considering her, as though weighing whether she was a threat or just an intruder who had stumbled too far. For the first time, Jasmine dared to look closer. She noticed the way its eyes softened slightly, the subtle twitch of its fingers as they rested at its side. Was it mercy? Understanding? She didn't know. Then, as if deciding it had seen enough, the gorilla turned away. Its massive shoulders shifted as it retreated slowly into the foliage, its presence still looming even as its form disappeared into the shadows. Jasmine stood there, trembling and rooted in place, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. She had survived. Somehow, against all odds, she had made it through an encounter with one of the most powerful creatures on Earth. The jungle around her seemed to exhale, the sounds of birds and insects gradually returning as the tension lifted. But Jasmine knew she couldn't stay. The gorilla might have spared her, but the jungle was still an unpredictable force. Her legs finally obeyed her, carrying her cautiously back toward the faint sounds of the group in the distance. Each step was heavy with the realization that she had come perilously close to danger, closer than she ever imagined when she first dreamed of this adventure. As she walked, the memory of the gorilla's extended hand stayed with her, a gesture she would spend years trying to understand. Was it a warning? A moment of connection? Whatever it was, Jasmine knew one thing for certain: the wild had tested her, and it had forever changed the way she saw the world. The gorilla's broad shoulders shifted as it slowly turned, retreating into the dense shadows of the jungle. Jasmine stood frozen, her body trembling, every nerve in her being still braced for an attack. She watched as its massive form disappeared into the thick foliage, the rustling leaves and faint thud of its footsteps the only sounds breaking the oppressive silence. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she sank to the ground, her breathing shallow and ragged, Relief swept over her in waves, but it was accompanied by an overwhelming sense of shock. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she pressed them to the damp earth, grounding herself in its solidity. The tension that had gripped her chest began to loosen, but her mind replayed the encounter on an endless loop. The size of the gorilla, the power in its gaze, and that strange, almost gentle gesture it had made with its hand. She couldn't decide whether she was terrified or awed or perhaps both. The jungle around her began to come alive again. The distant calls of birds returned, insects buzzed faintly, and the leaves swayed gently in the humid breeze. Yet, to Jasmine, everything felt different now, as if the jungle itself had shifted somehow, revealing a side of its character she hadn't seen before. A rustling sound behind her made her jump, her heart racing anew. But this time, it wasn't the gorilla. Jasmine Kofi's voice rang out, sharp and urgent. She turned to see him emerging from the trees, his machete in hand, his face etched with worry. Behind him, 2 other members of the group appeared, their expressions a mix of concern and frustration. "What are you doing here alone?" Kofi demanded, his tone firm but tinged with relief. "Do you have any idea how dangerous this is? You could have been killed." Jasmine opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Her throat was dry, and the weight of her reckless decision pressed down on her. She had ignored Kofi's warnings, disregarded the rules, and ventured into the jungle alone. And for what? A photo? A fleeting moment of adventure? "I'm sorry," she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't think." "No, you didn't," Kofi interrupted, his voice softening slightly as he knelt beside her. "But you're lucky. The gorilla didn't see you as a threat. Others might not have been so merciful." Jasmine nodded, her guilt deepening. The memory of the gorilla's unrelenting gaze flashed in her mind, and she shuddered. She had come so close to disaster, closer than she had ever imagined. Kofi helped her to her feet, his grip steady and reassuring. "Let's get you back to the group," he said. "You've had enough adventure for one day." As they made their way back, Jasmine couldn't help but glance over her shoulder, half expecting to see the gorilla watching her from the shadows. The jungle seemed quieter now, its vibrancy subdued, or perhaps her perception of it had changed. When they reached the main path, the other members of the group stared at her with wide eyes, their relief evident. Someone handed her a water bottle, and she drank deeply, the cool liquid soothing her parched throat. But the sense of relief didn't last long. As she sat on the edge of the trail, her mind replayed the events of the past hour. She had ventured into the jungle with a sense of invincibility, romanticizing the wild as a place to be conquered. But the encounter with the silverback had shattered that illusion. The jungle wasn't a place for humans to dominate or control. It was a force of nature, unpredictable, powerful, and deserving of respect. The gorilla's behavior had driven that lesson home in a way she would never forget. Kofi's voice broke through her thoughts. "Jasmine, do you understand now? This isn't just a place to visit. This is their home, their world. We are guests here, nothing more." She nodded solemnly, her chest heavy with the weight of his words. He was right. She had been arrogant, blinded by her desire for adventure. The jungle didn't care about her dreams or her curiosity. It followed its own rules, and she had been lucky to survive breaking them. As the group resumed their journey back to camp, Jasmine walked in silence, her thoughts swirling. The thrill of adventure that had once consumed her was replaced by a deep respect for the jungle and its inhabitants. The gorilla's eyes, its sheer presence, would stay with her forever, a reminder of the thin line between life and death in the wild. She looked up at the towering trees above her, their ancient branches stretching toward the sky. For the first time, she truly saw the jungle for what it was, not just a place of beauty, but a place of raw, untamed power. By the time they reached the safety of the camp, Jasmine felt a profound shift within herself. She had entered the jungle with excitement and naivety, but she was leaving with a new understanding. The wilderness was not something to be tamed or taken lightly. It was a force to be respected, admired, and feared. That night, as she lay in her tent listening to the distant sounds of the jungle, Jasmine closed her eyes. The image of the gorilla's extended hand lingered in her mind. It wasn't just a moment of mercy, it was a moment of connection. A reminder that in the wild, survival wasn't guaranteed, but respect was essential. Jasmine had learned her lesson, one she would carry with her for the rest of her life. The sun rose the next morning, casting the jungle in a golden light that seemed to soften its edges. The camp buzzed with activity as the group prepared to leave, their adventure coming to an end. Jasmine stood at the edge of the clearing, her eyes scanning the dense wall of greenery that had both captivated and terrified her over the past few days. The excitement she had felt upon first arriving had been replaced by something deeper: humility. She had entered the jungle with dreams of adventure, imagining herself as a bold explorer, untouched by fear. But now, standing at the threshold of its vastness, she understood how little she truly knew. The wilderness was not just a place of beauty. It was a place of power, where every creature, every leaf, every shadow operated within a delicate balance of survival. It was a world that didn't bend to human will, a reminder that life itself was fragile and fleeting. As the jeep rumbled away from the camp, Jasmine sat quietly, her camera untouched in her lap. The photos she had taken earlier felt insignificant now, mere snapshots of a world far too vast to be captured. Her thoughts drifted to the silverback gorilla, its unflinching gaze and the strange gesture it had made toward her. She would never forget the moment its massive hand had reached out, as if offering some silent message. Mercy? Curiosity? A warning? Whatever it had been, it had shaken her to her core. Kofi's words echoed in her mind. This is their home, their world. We are guests here. Nothing more. The truth of that statement resonated deeply now. She had been foolish to think she could wander into the jungle without consequence, as if her presence would be accepted without question. The jungle had taught her that survival was not a guarantee but a privilege, one earned through respect and caution. She had been given a second chance, and she didn't intend to waste it. As the jeep reached the edge of the jungle, Jasmine asked the driver to stop. She stepped out, her boots crunching softly on the gravel road. Turning to face the towering trees one last time, she felt a strange mix of emotions: gratitude, awe, and a lingering sense of vulnerability. The jungle seemed to breathe around her, its vastness both intimidating and inviting. The sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating an interplay of light and shadow that felt alive. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also unyielding, a force of nature that demanded respect. Jasmine let out a slow breath, her chest rising and falling with the weight of her reflection. The jungle taught me that we are visitors, never its masters, she thought, the words resonating in her mind like a mantra. She placed her hand on the side of the jeep, her fingers brushing against the warm metal. As much as she had dreamed of this place, she now understood that it wasn't hers to claim. It belonged to the creatures that called it home: the gorillas, the birds, the insects, and the unseen forces that had existed long before her and would continue long after. Climbing back into the jeep, Jasmine settled into her seat, her gaze fixed on the trees as they began to recede into the distance. She felt lighter somehow, as though the jungle had stripped away the illusions she had carried with her. The other members of the group chatted quietly, their voices a comforting hum in the background. But Jasmine remained silent, lost in her thoughts. The jungle had tested her, humbled her, and, in its own way, offered her a kind of wisdom she couldn't have found anywhere else. As the vehicle sped down the dirt road, She made a silent promise to herself to carry the lessons of the jungle with her, to approach life with the same respect and humility it had demanded of her. Jasmine's eyes lingered on the horizon, where the dense green jungle met the bright blue sky. Her lips curved into a faint smile, one born of gratitude rather than triumph. She would never forget this place, the raw power of its beauty, the thrill of its mystery, and the unforgettable encounter with a creature that had reminded her how small and fragile she truly was. As the jungle disappeared from view, Jasmine leaned back and closed her eyes, the distant hum of the engine blending with the sound of the wild that still echoed in her mind. She hadn't just visited the jungle, she had been changed by it. And that, she realized, was the greatest adventure of all.